Hello, hello, hello. Happy Monday, or should I say very sad Monday. It is Monday, August 16th, 2021, and Afghanistan has fallen to the Taliban. That's obviously the news of the weekend. We went from Afghanistan taking over multiple provinces to Afghanistan having complete control of the country, including Kabul. The only part of territory, to my understanding, the United States still have, or the national government, the former national government, still has any influence over, is the military section of Kabul International Airport, and we're just trying to evacuate everybody. So a very, very embarrassing turn of events. And really, that's what we're going to talk about today. I think it's the biggest story probably of the Biden administration so far. Because COVID, I think, would be something that you'd call, an ongoing story for the last 5 years. But really, this is the biggest single event of the Biden administration, and he hasn't exactly covered himself in glory. So, I don't mean to brag about my own tweet, but I think a really simple way to look at this is that the Taliban are just better at regime change than we are. We talk about what happened here. You're talking about a situation where we spent 20 years trying to change the government of Afghanistan, and it fell apart in a day. The Taliban spent 20 years hiding out in the mountains and managed to snap their fingers, and all of a sudden they have complete control of the country. Like the entire military just melted away. There were 300,000 soldiers apparently in this military, disappeared, gone, poof, like magic. And we're sitting here just like wondering what happened. Biden is just sitting in Camp David wondering what happened. So there's so much to talk about in terms of like what's actually happened on the ground. And I'm just going to go through a lot of what I've seen on Twitter. And then also talking about what exactly is the Biden administration doing. Like there's a press conference scheduled for 3:45 Eastern. It's about an hour and 45 minutes from now. And we'll see what they actually say. But yeah, not great. So new news is that the UN Security Council has called for an immediate cessation of all hostilities and the establishment through inclusive negotiations of a new government that is united, inclusive, and representative. Like what do they think they're doing? What does the Security Council think it's doing here? Oh, we need a united, inclusive, and representative government. The Taliban controls the country. No, it's the Taliban government. Guess what? That's what we have. Honestly, I think the big theme of this is I was pro-withdrawal. I still am pro-withdrawal. Like, I don't think we have any business being in Afghanistan. I think we should have left. I think we should have left a long time ago. But I'd like everybody to stop humiliating themselves and pretending that somehow the Taliban is going to just be suddenly inclusive and pro-women's rights and things like that. For example, we have a little bit of a change. I don't know if you're noticing this, but this is Afghan national television. I don't know if you can tell the difference. It's very subtle. A very subtle difference between what was happening before and what's happening now. But I think you can tell this is the old Afghan television right here on the bottom, and this is the new Afghan national television. If you haven't seen this article by Preston Byrne, I highly recommend it. It's fascinating. To give you the lead quote, the fact that the Taliban is using U.S.-based servers to run its terror state, and nobody in the Biden administration has thought to disconnect it, even as U.S. forces flee in disarray, is a strategic blunder on par with Pearl Harbor. And he wrote a whole article about this entitled, "Did America Just Lose Afghanistan Because of WhatsApp?" And it's fascinating. It's the idea that the Taliban basically used WhatsApp to coordinate all their activity, to basically persuade Afghan soldiers that they should resign, and to inform the public generally, here's the new 911 number, here's the emergency response, we are here and we are now sovereign again, just like that. It's like they snapped their fingers. And it's actually kind of incredible. And, think about the fact that we had, all of our tech companies were so focused on the problems of conservatives using their technology platforms. And meanwhile, the Taliban is straight up organizing on Facebook. Donald Trump does not have a Facebook account, does not have an Instagram account, but the Taliban coordinated the takeover of Afghanistan using Facebook Incorporated's technology. Maybe that's a problem. Maybe we need something a little bit different in terms of the focus of our myopic tech elites. It's kind of ridiculous when you think about it, really. we have other stuff. Yeah, as Justin O'Donnell put it, the Taliban has controlled Kabul for less than a day and has already set up an emergency broadcast system and the 911 call using WhatsApp. Maybe they shouldn't have had access to WhatsApp in the first place. It might have really put a crimp in their ability to snap their fingers and have control of the entire government. Just saying. Also, that's a very funny point that illiterate goat farmers can provide more reliable civic services than the Detroit City Council. Probably true, probably depressing, really not a good sign for our empire. Joe Biden is again talking to the country at 3:45, to be expected. He's for a while it sounded like he wasn't going to talk to them at all. I think Jack Posobiec had reporting that Jill thought he could project power and esteem from while he was sitting in Camp David. Of course he couldn't. That wasn't going to work. You have, this CNN clip. I can't play the sound because I don't have it set up with Chrome. But CNN reporter saying they're just chanting "Death to America," but they seem friendly at the same time. CNN, not impressive. This is very good. I don't normally take too many comments. Brutal and savage, but smart. Exactly right, from Sorrow on Twitter. It's exactly a good way to describe the Taliban. I can't help it. I was just talking with Posobiec about this, and we're going to look back at what the Taliban accomplished, and we're going to talk about them in the same breath as Mao in terms of his rebellion against the Chinese government and Jap against the Americans. This is one of the most effective and successful examples of guerrilla warfare in history, in world history. I mean, you think about how difficult it was. It's just, they were facing an unbelievably technologically superior foe with over a 20-year period, and they still managed to just wait them out and get them to leave the country. It's actually kind of impressive. Iran thinks it's a chance for durable peace. I don't know how that works. This is actually something I want to talk more in detail about. Matt Walsh has a interesting point. He says, quote, "The entire Afghan army folded without firing a shot, and most people seem determined to absolve them of blame for completely refusing the one thing they were duty-bound to do." I find that sort of amazing. There's a good point there. It's clear that the Afghan army just fell apart and just surrendered en masse, and that's a little bizarre. But it helps to kind of understand what happened when you realize this. This is from Brian Dean Wright. Quote, "The Afghan Air Force didn't take flight because, God help us, Joe Biden refused to let outside maintenance crews into Afghanistan, effectively grounding the fleet." And here it is from the Daily Beast. They didn't let contractors into the country to service the aircraft. Now, I think if you had told Americans that we are going to withdraw from Afghanistan, and they would be like, yes, of course. I mean, the polls show that there's broad support for withdrawal, even now. But if you had told them that includes banning American private contractors who are basically the key linchpin to the Afghan Air Force, and so in so doing, we literally gut the Afghan Air Force and effectively mean that the entire Afghan army has no more air support. Most Americans have been like, "Well, you can let the contractors continue to do their thing. That's fine. We don't need a military presence of our own to say that private contractors can go in and help the Afghan army with their air force, right? Right. Like that seems pretty coherent, even from like a non-interventionist perspective. I don't see I don't see why we would have had to just completely make the Afghan Air Force just incompetent. Now, there's a secondary problem. David Hines makes a good point here. I think that, the fact is, after 20 years of building the Afghan government and military, they were still dependent on American contractors just to do maintenance on the planes. That's a huge problem. They should have been capable of doing this on their own. The entire point of this exercise was to build, or of most of the last 18 years, right after we got rid of the Taliban, apparently we spent the last 20 years trying to get the Afghan government to stand up on its own. You would think that would include being able to do their own maintenance and not being entirely dependent on Americans. I don't think Americans had any idea how dependent the Afghan military was on American support. I don't think anybody had any understanding of that, at least in terms of the normal public. So that's a little weird. Clearly a very, very bad strategic mistake. There's no reason why we had to structure our affairs this way, why we had to structure our military interaction this way. We could have helped the Afghans train their own air force. Not great. And they do have like a lot of planes. This is Rep. Thomas Massey. He points out, I don't know if you can read these numbers, but it's something like they have 167 planes. The Afghan National Army has 167. That's not a trivial air force. It's a lot smaller than the American Air Force, obviously, but compared to the Taliban, which had zero planes, and the Afghan army has 167, you'd think, this is not that they'd be able to have air support if they consolidated their forces. This wouldn't have been a problem. But again, you have this thing where we just basically gutted their Air Force. And this is where another point I was talking with Jack about, if you are in a position where you're an Afghan soldier, there were already problems paying them, right? They weren't getting paid. And then you find out that you had air support, and all of a sudden the air support is completely gone. There are no more airplanes in the Afghanistan army, and you're still going to face off against the Taliban? Like, really? I would be furious. And I'm not surprised that these people who maybe weren't that into being in the Afghan army in the first place, given that they weren't getting paid, the money had stopped coming, the government was incompetent, the Americans were leaving. I'm actually not all that surprised that the Afghan army, under those circumstances, decided to just melt into the wilderness and disappear, which is basically what happened. The Afghan army just sort of dissolved. They melted into a puddle. Like, they weren't beaten. They just disappeared. Everybody in the military took off their clothes. The institution ceased to function and exist as it previously had. And that's a remarkable thing. Kind of weird that there's here's one major Taliban spokesperson. Kind of weird that they're on Twitter and Donald Trump isn't. Again, there's just this myopia among American tech elites about focusing on American conservatives as like the primary threat to humanity. I want to just venture that maybe there are other people who you should be more concerned about. I'm just going to throw that out there. Just saying. I love some of these. The Islamic Emirate has ordered its mujahideen and once again instructs them that no one is allowed to enter anyone's house without permission. Life, property, and honor of none shall be harmed, but must be protected by the mujahideen. Well, I hope that works. They have the official Twitter account of the spokesman of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. They were banning Trump and all of Trump's comms team 6 months ago. You guys remember this, right? Like, Trump's comms team, they tried to put Trump's messages on Twitter. They were getting banned from Twitter. And in the interim, you have the Taliban literally using Twitter to coordinate its affairs and speak publicly. Trump was still president when that nonsense was happening. Do you guys see the problem here? Like, we need to, I've talked about platform access being a civil right. Like, if the Taliban is going to be able to use Twitter, we need to be able to use it as well. It seems really, really quite straightforward that that's something we should be able to do. The White House has some talking points. We can go over these. They're not great. Let's see if I can zoom in. Okay, this is kind of hard to zoom in on. So I'll read them out, the relevant ones. Top line, quote, the president was not willing to enter a third decade of conflict and surge in thousands of more troops to fight in a civil war that Afghanistan wouldn't fight for themselves. Fair. That's true. Totally support that. It's clear from the past few weeks that would have been necessary. More troops for an indefinite amount of time. Yeah, I think that's true for the long term. You obviously would have said that we would have needed more troops. That said, I think there's something missing in here about us pulling on all the military contractors that were necessary to service Afghanistan's planes so that they'd have an air force. They should get very, very specific questions. If there's any serious press conference or interrogation of what's happening here, that should be question number one. Why did we completely gut the Afghan Air Force? Quote, it was not an inevitability. It was a possibility. This is the White House talking points. If you guys are wondering what I'm reading from, the White House talking points on Afghanistan, they just put out a couple hours ago. So it was not an inevitability that Afghanistan would fall, just a possibility. Okay, but it seems to have been a very, very strong possibility in retrospect, especially given the fact that the Air Force fell apart. Moreover, I'm seeing tons of stuff about the fact that military intel was saying that already before this was happening, Afghan soldiers were surrendering by the hundreds to Taliban forces, like all the time. And yet, it's totally ridiculous. POTUS said in July that the Afghan military had the capability to fight the Taliban, but they had to demonstrate the will. Sadly, that will did not materialize. Again, if you got their Air Force, like we didn't have the will, it's actually kind of not surprising that they didn't have the will. And then all sorts of other stuff about saying that they're trying to claim it's not an intelligent failure because they knew there was a distinct possibility Kabul would fall. They said they had prepared for an immediate fall because there were military troops ready to deploy if that happened. I just don't believe that. You don't see the scenes we're seeing if they really considered it a serious possibility that the whole thing would fall like a house of cards. But then it did. It's just a massive intelligence failure. And so I guess my broader question is, like, where are the resignations, right? General Milley, as I pointed out here, like this video, I mean, I don't know if you've seen this video, but it has General Milley saying they're going to pull off a retrograde in good order. He's describing the fundamental mission. Well, that's a failure. Why has he not resigned? Like, why has General Milley not resigned? Why is Lloyd Austin still in his job? You know, is there any accountability in our administration for this? And you don't try and like get out of this by saying, oh, well, you support a withdrawal, so you support this. No. Well, can you come at the same time? I think it's very clear you could say we needed to pull out of Afghanistan. And also it would be nice if like there weren't Afghans being run over by American planes on the tarmac. It seems like a very straightforward thing that you can like, I can see both of those things at the same time. And you know, I think Sorab has a very good tweet here. Sorab Amara, who you should follow if you don't. Quote, for 5 years, the credentialed morons warned that Trump was a foreign catastrophe waiting to happen. None of the prophecies came to pass. And 7 months in, Biden, his VP, and his press secretary are AWOL, while White House photos dock CIA stations and Afghanistan's drop from fleeing U.S. craft. I heard somewhere Liz Psaki had a breakdown. I don't have too much detail on that, but that's what I heard. That's the scuttlebutt. And I think it's not surprising that the vice president, I mean, I heard there's also some news about how Kamala Harris was saying like, no, the administration wanted Kamala Harris to get up and take credit and like speak on Afghanistan. And she was like, no, I'm not taking credit for this. You need to find somebody else. find someone else who's just a complete loser, a complete like skeptical person to do this. So, I mean, I think everybody in the administration is trying to avoid speaking, avoid taking credit. They don't even know what to say. They have no idea what they're doing. They're just completely overtaken by events. And we were told these were the competent people. We were told like, oh, you know, the adults are back. Yeah, they're all children actually, and they're not in power. With that, I'll start taking some questions and then also go through Twitter and kind of see, you know, this is one of these things where there's constantly news breaking like every moment. And so, you know, you can kind of read other people's analysis, but I'm going to go through comments and see. People say, Maud Ricky asked, what should we expect from the Biden speech? I think you look at, again, a lot of those talking points. That's what you're going to hear. They're going to try and pretend that it wasn't a complete intelligence failure. They're going to pretend that it was, you know, not an inevitability, but we realized it was a possibility. And they're going to try and push it on Trump if they can, because we've seen a lot of that too, even though guess what, guys, you're in charge. Trump is not in charge. You're in charge. So you push the date back to September in the middle of, you know, decide to pull the withdrawal in the middle of fighting season. You watched it happen. It's all stuff that you did. Let's see what else. Somebody says Taliban insurrection Trumpers. They brought the heat this weekend. Amazing performance. That's very good, Dave. That's a very good performance. I mean, it's a really impressive feat. Like they're, again, as I said at the beginning, it turns out the Taliban's a lot better at regime change than the United States. That's just true. Turns out that that's the case. Ricky says it's a big loss for the deep state. Yep. No, they didn't do too well. Let's leave thousands of guns and ammo for the Taliban. Absolutely worthless. That's another thing that, you know, the people who were saying that, the people who were saying withdrawal is a bad idea didn't talk about like, oh, we've really just left a bunch of war material for the Taliban to take over. You'd think that the military, in the course of doing a withdrawal in good order, would be able to make sure that the Taliban didn't just get access to multi-million-dollar drones. So, like, maybe but then again, I mean, this is the same military that was completely incompetent for something like 20 years. It's not surprising that the same people who butchered the occupation are now butchering the ultimate, you know, butchering the withdrawal. Let's see. Peter Watkins says, Godspeed to those 82nd boys heading back. Thank God I'm not in the Army anymore. True that. I hope, you know, prayers up for them. Dave says, soon the Taliban were of cleaner water than Flint, Michigan. Yeah, they might, apparently, like given how effective they managed to manage their WhatsApp. That wouldn't be totally surprised. Let's see. What else do we have? Sarowan says impeachable. I think that's another thing. This is actually kind of impeachable. And it would be one thing if it were a bad outcome we were prepared for, but basically the Biden administration like pretended that this couldn't possibly happen. They were just like totally wrong. They totally disregarded the intelligence. And then Biden isn't even there to run the government. It's more, you know, the funny thing is it's not necessarily like impeachable in the sense that it's a crime. It really is more of a classic 25th Amendment situation where the guy's just too old. I mean, this is why companies, normal corporations have retirement ages at 65. Like they don't expect they're old 78-year-old people to effectively run the country. And you know what else? This really feels like, there's a few analogies, right? Everybody's using Saigon, but you know what this feels like? It feels like the Afghanistan war, the enterprise, if you will, sort of like a massive bankrupt corporation. Like I think of it like Enron. And it just kind of kept going for a while. The way Enron kept operating like a zombie, even though it was functionally bankrupt, until one day it just couldn't anymore. And then all of a sudden the whole thing fell to the ground and collapsed, and there's a whole bunch of collateral damage and everybody's in a mess. That's what it feels like. It feels like a bankruptcy. I don't know if anybody else feels that way and sees the sort of analogy. Obviously, it's a lot more devastating than bankruptcy because it's a war and a country and not just a single company and its shareholders being hurt. But that's the way it feels, like just a bankrupt enterprise. Somebody says, what if this is a ruse to get targets to the service and then take them out? This is no ruse. Fred blogs, quote, I'm British. We got kicked out of Kabul in 1842. Nothing was learned. Yeah, apparently no one ever learns anything about getting out of Afghanistan. We taught this lesson to the Russians and we still didn't learn it ourselves. So Poso tweeted out a tweet from a CCP account. This is Corey Lambrecht saying this, which says that the USA cannot protect Taiwan. This is another thing to think about, guys. I mean, given how embarrassing this is, China's able to look at Taiwan and be like, you really think the Americans are going to protect you? And under Biden, I don't know that they will. I don't know that we have the stomach for it. I mean, I guess part of the reason for that is it's not like we're on top of this at all. Everybody just went on vacation and freaked out. We had radio silence from the White House for like 3 or 4 days while there's a military catastrophe in Afghanistan. Like, imagine if Winston Churchill pulled a stunt like this at Dunkirk, where he's just like, oh, we're just not going to do anything. I'm on vacation. I'm going out to Chartwell for my country house for a while, while we handle this. No, people expect to hear from the leader when something's going wrong, and something is going very, very wrong. Corey Lambrecht, another great one here. They ban a humble pillow merchant, yet allow the Taliban. Yeah, like everybody's so upset about Mike Lindell. It's like, do you really think his claims are a bigger problem than Taliban propaganda? I don't think so. Let's see. What else do we have? Options Quant asks, can they make Twitter and Facebook pay for the damage from the Taliban? I guess they could try and make an argument that Twitter and Facebook gave military material support, like there's some material support of terrorism laws. If indeed Facebook knew about the fact that the Taliban was using its technology to effectively conduct warfare against the United States, that seems like material support to me. I don't know, but this is super armchair lawyering. I don't really know. I mean, who knows if I'm actually right about the law on these questions. Let's see, what else do we got in terms of question? Pendergast asks, will I be doing a live reaction to Biden's speech? I don't think so. That's normally when I work out. And, unlike Joe Biden, I'm not the president. So I feel like I can continue, I have a training appointment at 3 p.m. So I'm going to try at 4 p.m. So I'm going to try and watch it. And maybe I'll give a quick live reaction, but probably not. Somebody says, will Biden take questions? Should we expect any forced resignation announcements? I think someone will resign. That's my prediction. If I'm making a prediction, I think Biden has to come back to the White House. It being so embarrassing, someone needs to fall on their sword. I expect it will be Milley. That's my guess. Milley was appointed by Trump. I think Milley will have to fall on his sword. He's the most public face of the military's in failure here. And I think that's what's going on. What else do we have? D. Judish says, my Afghani workers are all trapped in Kabul right in the Taliban's teeth. It's extremely sad. I think we didn't really have many good answers ultimately. And this is why we shouldn't be doing these interventions in the first place. We don't have the stomach for them. Like, I'm at the point where unless we're willing to turn a foreign country into an American colony, we don't do regime change. We don't do this type of intervention ever again. Hopefully the lessons we all learn is we don't do this stuff anymore. This is silly and annoying and dumb, and we shouldn't do it. Avenger says, was there any scenario where the Afghan army would have fought back against the Taliban? I think we at least have to try the sort of counter, I'm losing my word. My access to words here. I guess I'm talking too long. But essentially, like the alternate universe in which the Afghan army has its air force still. You got to think that a big contributor to how quickly the Afghan army was surrendering to the Taliban has to be the fact that they just lost their air force in a snap. And I can only imagine that a soldier who goes from having extraordinarily good air support to having none instantly because of voluntary decisions to withdraw by other people, I can only imagine that would be incredibly demoralizing. So I think, in that counterfactual situation, that's the word I'm looking for. There's some reasonable chance that they actually fight back and don't just dissolve into nothing. But I think the moment the Air Force was gone, that probably guarantees it. The Crusader Rabbit says, it basically establishes the liberal argument right now. Quote, Biden had 8 months to withdraw properly, yet it's Trump's fault. Yeah, that's basically the objection here. There had to be a way to do this that was a little more effective, that didn't lead to complete collapse immediately. One would think that that's correct. Dinesh's Sawan says, quote, global hypocrite United States was teaching Indian human rights and democracy, and they abandoned Afghans at the mercy of the Taliban. Now, where is human rights champion of USA? Where is imposter of democracy? Well, I think if you, Dinesh, have a point about the hypocrisy of the United States and our inability to stick by our own values when it comes to these things. There's a reason I'm going to hope we're not going to do these interventions in the future. Let's see. What else do we have here? Chase Silverman asks, where is Colin Powell? I don't know. He's not in the government. I don't really expect him to show up, but I am certainly wondering where Biden is or anybody with the administration. Somebody asked what I'm drinking. I'm drinking cold brew coffee. It's delicious. Let's see. What else do we have? Spencer Cogdill says, I should bet money on Biden not finishing his term. That's a good, somebody knowing that I like to make bets on these things. Yeah, I'm starting to kind of come around to the idea that this is an indicator of the problem, again, of having a 78-year-old in office. It's a big part of the problem. And we're not like, and I wouldn't be surprised if the rest of the administration, people like Ron Klain, ultimately end up making a decision that, you know what, Biden really shouldn't be in power anymore. Like, we need to move on. Biden's clearly not up to it. All right, let's go through Twitter. Let's see what we have in terms of any new news on this front, because I didn't really want to talk about anything else today. Like, I know there might be other news, but the only thing I really am interested in talking about is Afghanistan. It's all I've been thinking about all weekend, frankly. And I mean, I'm sure the fact that we had such good viewership is indicative of this is what y'all are thinking about too. Let's see, what do we have in terms of anything interesting in the news? This is so pathetic. Quote, this is absolutely pathetic. Quote, the human rights of all citizens, Afghan citizens, especially women, girls, and members of minority groups, must be respected, said the U.S. ambassador to the UN. This is a joke. We lost the country. Like, we lost the country. We don't have this sort of influence. The idea that we can just say this stuff, it's such vacuous diplomatic speak. Must be respected. Are we going to enforce this on the Taliban? No, we're not. Okay, then maybe we shouldn't make ultimatums. We just look feeble and weak. This is the problem that we're talking about with China too. Like, if this is the kind of thing we say about Afghanistan when we're literally fleeing the country, what are we going to say? China must respect Taiwan's sovereignty. No, they won't. Not in a world where you're saying garbage like this. Afghan women fear a return to the dark days. It's very tragic for them, no doubt. That said, I don't know if it's a problem that we could have avoided. Matt Zell, this is actually a good point. In Saigon, we got 130,000 people out in a week. We've been trying to conduct an Afghanistan evacuation for the better part of a month, and we've barely moved 2,500 people. That's pretty embarrassing. I mean, in general, we were just much more capable of war fighting in the 1960s and 70s and 50s. And maybe we've lost that capability. I don't know. Is it morale? What is it? It's a good question. It's a very, very good question about like why we don't actually have this authority. And Kenneth Slayer, actually, this is a good point from a quote. Can you have a global economy without having to have a global military presence? No, I think there's truth to that. So even from an American first perspective, we need to have things like a strong Navy to keep the sea lanes open, because it is very much in our national interest to make sure that global trade continues and that we benefit from it. That said, do we have to have an outpost in Afghanistan? Is that absolutely necessary? It seems like a really expensive, hard place where more people die than is necessary. I think really, really expensive to continue to have it. It's our most expensive and fragile outpost. So not clear that we needed to keep that. Macron vows EU initiative to protect against migrant flows from Afghanistan. If you were around when the whole EU decided to open their doors to Syrian refugees, it's funny that like suddenly that plan, that's not happening again, apparently. Macron's smart enough to realize he shouldn't be doing that. And we got all sorts of people asking, help evacuate journalists and their families. There's so many people who need to get out. That's the real tragedy of all this. That's the tragedy of not realizing how quickly it would happen and not being better prepared for it. And I think that failure, the failure to not be better prepared for this, it ultimately got to land on the military. I think that's right. It's ultimately. Let's see. What else? Any other comments? Let's look at, see what we got in terms of interesting stuff. Quote, Matt McPherson, do I think the scene in Braveheart where the Irish and the Scottish pretend to fight and turn on the British is an accurate reenactment of ANA and the Taliban in Kabul? It might be. I think it's more, I doubt it. I think that the idea that, I mean, obviously there would be some infiltrators, but I don't think they were pretending to fight. I don't think that's a good explanation of what's going on here. I think it was more they were kind of being paid to fight. They weren't that invested in it. And then the moment everything looked like it was going south, they just left their posts. They weren't invested in it. So I think it's slightly different. It's not like active deceit on the part of the Afghan army, but more like they weren't invested in the project. They were mercenaries, effectively. And, the other side believed. And I think that, that's another reason this was never going to work. My first thought, why were there no women, children, and elderly at the airstrip? A good question. It's very, very strange, but the people who can freak out will, I like Dinesh Sawan. This is a great commentator. Mr. Antony Blinken, he was in India a few weeks ago teaching us democracy and human rights. Where is he hidden? Why is Blinken not blinking immediate flashlight? This is a great comment. I love this. It's totally true. The idea that we're lecturing other people on human rights and we just look so weak. It's so embarrassing. This didn't have to be done in a way that was so embarrassing and humiliating, that was so in tension with the things you're saying. And that's, I think, the most frustrating thing about all of it. I don't like being embarrassed and humiliated. And that's what it's just like watching a really particularly humiliating defeat. I think the one benefit, the one silver lining here is that this wasn't an orgy of violence that led to this takeover. It was pretty peaceful in a sense because everybody just surrendered. And ultimately there is something to understand. I mean, I think people miss this about the Taliban strategy. They obviously negotiated this whole deal with us at Doha, and they were making noises about a power sharing agreement with the Afghan National Army. But I think they were planning ultimately to try and do this peaceful, immediate takeover. And I think from their perspective, it makes perfect sense. Like, why do they want to have a power sharing arrangement that only has the seeds of civil war? They don't want to negotiate. They want control. And so by doing what they've done, they basically ended the civil war. I mean, if you think about it, the civil war in Afghanistan is over. The Taliban won. They are now in control. And so there is a possibility of like peace in Afghanistan. Now, it's not a peace we like. It's not a peace we're satisfied with. It's not a peace that I think anybody really wants. But I mean, this is ultimately peace. Man, lots of interesting YouTube comments. Wander this world. Do we know if Biden was given poor intel, or did he ignore the accurate intel? Seeing both reported online. I suspect it's the latter. That's what I'm seeing more reports on, but it's going to be hard to settle. There should really be a whole commission, right? We don't need a January 6th commission. We need a Afghanistan invasion commission. And Afghanistan, like, how did this happen? I want to know who in the administration, like, what intel did the administration have? Why were these mistakes made? There should be court martials. There should be people held accountable. I mean, these are the top officials in our government screwing up. And it's why don't we get to know, what was happening? So interesting. D. Judish says the women and children were there at the airport. They just couldn't jump the fence. I could see that being true. That makes a lot of sense, actually. The only people who would get over the fence and onto the airport tarmac in violation of normal security protocols were the men. That's not unreasonable. What else do we have in the news? We just have a lot of commentary. Let's see. Let's get back to the top. Yeah, Ghani, what a useless guy. President Ashraf Ghani once promised to rebuild Afghanistan. On the Sunday, he just fled the country. It's never a good sign when people have to flee the country. It's really, really embarrassing. I think John Robb described it as a hollow state, and I think that's exactly what we're dealing with here. Let's see. A few people have shared how intimidating and scary they find the AKs, lack of uniform, and the long hair of the Taliban. This makes them look like a militia. Women in particular want this to change. I hate to break it to you, but I suspect that the women of Afghanistan are not going to have a substantial voice going forward in the governance of the country. Just my theory. I'm just going to throw that out there. I don't know. It's a bold prediction on my part, I know, but I think I'm pretty right on it. Turns out we're not like, this whole, I think somebody pointed out, like, the whole woke critique of the United States is just BS. We're like incredibly liberal, tolerant, welcoming country. And, we're sort of seeing what it really looks like to be in an intolerant place. And I think, in general, people have taken a lot of the things we have in this country for granted. Let's see. This is a good question. Your thoughts on the weird time zone differences and the Camp David pick? Well, here's my theory. Camp David isn't used that often, right? People are saying, that Camp David pic proves it might be an older picture, but I would suspect that, it's not the Situation Room where it's used every day or used routinely, right? Camp David's only used when the president's there. And so I wouldn't be surprised that there's a clock that didn't change, somebody didn't get the clock set for standard. They just forgot that on the checklist, something. I could easily just see that being the case. And I think that photo in general is embarrassing for other reasons, namely that it has it outs Doha, Doha Station, which would be a CIA office in Doha, as well as CIA officials generally. That was, I think, the really big thing. But I don't think in general, blame stupidity rather than incompetence. I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, here's the thing. Do people really think that Biden wouldn't, if he is at Camp David, that he wouldn't be participating at a video conference at some point during the day? I realize Biden's not that up on things and has a lack of energy. But, even I can roll out of bed and do a Zoom call. So I would think, and I don't have that much energy. I'm totally lazy. So I certainly think that Joe Biden could roll out of bed, basically put on a slacks and a button down in slacks, and then go do a Zoom call in a Situation Room. I don't think I doubt that. I think that's probably a real photo, and they really are just incompetent enough to out people. So that's what I suspect is going on there. Let's assume, I think the safest thing with the Biden administration is to assume incompetence before malice, because the guy who's running the White House is 78. He's very old. So Dan Hickey has, first, Eric Longjaw says, at least there are no mean tweets. Man, I miss having President Trump. I really do. I was a Trump supporter. There's a lot of things about, what happened in the election that frustrated me. And I think we made some big strategic errors on COVID, things like that. But man, I really wish we had President Trump. I really wish we had President Trump still in power. Dan Hickey says, quote, no one is ever held accountable. This has been a pattern of the last several decades and has seemed to increase over time. It's probably the most frustrating thing about this whole event is watching people not be held to account. I think in general, most of us would really like that to happen. Wander This World says, I find it funny Psaki never mentioned taking a week off, but announced a while ago that she would step down in a couple months as press secretary. Yeah. I'm hearing that she had a breakdown. That's what I'm hearing. I hear Jen Psaki had a breakdown. Like some sort of anxiety type panic attack thing, and took the week off. That's what I'm hearing. It doesn't surprise me. It's a pretty stressful situation. Press secretary is a stressful job. Maybe she just wasn't equipped to go out there anymore and needed a break. But that's what I hear. And I think what corroborates that is, she's normally, again, as you point out, the press secretary transition that was announced months ago. There's no way, if this was a scheduled vacation, news reporters would have heard about it. So it's an unscheduled vacation. So why is Jen Psaki not at the stand? I think that's the most likely explanation here. I think Jen Psaki likely had some sort of panic attack and needed to take some time. Perfectly reasonable, but that's what I think happened here. So, somebody says, tell me again how Afghanistan is an empire slaver, but the Taliban walks right in. Well, they're not an empire. They're part of the country. I think that's the easiest way to analyze that particular comment. Yeah. Dan Hickey says, quote, we have 6,000 soldiers, 60,000 Afghans, NGOs, Americans, and other Westerners surrounded at Karzai International Airport, which has only one airstrip. The Taliban have mortars, stingers, and artillery, and one shot would take them out. I assume that's what you're saying. Yeah, so that's an interesting point. And one has to realize, if the Taliban wanted to capture American troops right now as hostages, they could do so really easily, right? One mortar in the middle of the airstrip stops all the evacuations, right? But they're not doing that. I actually really strongly, and this is my theory, I think that there are strict orders on high from Taliban commanders to the frontline soldiers. They are not to interfere with the American evacuation, not to interfere. Right. And because think about the perspective of the Taliban. They're winning. It's unbelievably embarrassing for the United States. They're already in control of the country. They're about to do deals with China, about to do deals with Russia. They're in great shape. They have the entire Islamic world in their back. and the United States is leaving. What's the only way they could lose this? The only way they could lose this is if they start killing Americans and actually making us so angry that we decide, you know what, maybe we shouldn't leave. Maybe we should come back in and kill you all. And then they're back to where they were 20 years ago, where, clearly we are a stronger military power. And if we make the decision that the Taliban can't be the main central government of Afghanistan, we can prevent that from happening. Like, that's what we do have the military power to do. Like, we can force them back into the hills if we want to, and they don't want to be back in the hills. You got to figure it's kind of annoying being in the hills. Being a guerrilla is not very pleasant. They don't want to do that. So my thesis is Taliban has won this war. They know they've won it. They know that the only way they could lose it is if the United States changes its mind. So from their perspective, they're basically strict orders not to intervene in the American evacuation. That's my thesis about what's going on. And so I know there are some people who are really, really worried about what's going to happen there, but I actually, if I make a prediction here, my prediction would be pretty solid. They breached other aspects of the truce agreement, right? They're not dealing with the Afghan National Army. They've taken over the country. But I think this is a line they're going to stick to because I think that it's in their interest, right? It's very much in their interests not to mess with the United States as it's evacuating because it's so embarrassing already for us. Let's see. Yeah, Dan Higgy says that this can get much, much worse because they're at the mercy of the Taliban. That's true. And if we don't get people out quickly, it could get worse, a lot worse, very, very quickly. Hopefully, our military is competent enough to get this in order. As long as the Taliban's not interfering, to be able to get us out too. Bill Meehan, will Biden still have the 9/11 withdrawal celebration he was planning? I don't think anybody's celebrating this ever again. I think they're going to try and they want to memory hold this as soon as possible. I think we're going to get some ridiculous, aggressive COVID news in the next week because they just want to talk about anything but this. The Biden administration is so much happier talking about COVID and how terrible it is that Republicans aren't getting vaccinated. That's like their favorite thing to talk about right now. Let's see. A lot of people talking about what Psaki is dealing with. She got tired of lying so much. Kayleigh had to deal with worse. It's very true. Kayleigh had to deal with much worse. Kayleigh wasn't getting, full spreads in Vogue. The Republicans in the Trump administration, the Republican women especially, were really poorly treated. Kim says, when you have to lie constantly in the face of the truth being broadcast to the world, anxiety happens. I think that's right. And I think that explains a lot of what Psaki's dealing with. Let's see. What else do we got here? we have I found the Islamists. Inshallah, Taliban will help Uyghurs in China. Hate to break it to you, bud, but I think they're about to do a deal with China. One thing you can bet, I don't think the Taliban are going to mess with China. I think they know China has China wouldn't put up with that. Yeah, Taliban stand in the chat. It's kind of funny. These people exist. Let's see. Gino says the deep state wanted this outcome. It just came faster than they thought. I don't know that they wanted this outcome. I think they wanted to stay indefinitely. I think they wanted. There were too many contractors and too much money on the line. So I think it's different. Dan Hecky says he agrees with my assessment. That's cool, but that it's a fog of war. Anything can happen. One mistake and it will become a bloodbath. I think that's true. It is. I think you're right that it is a very fragile situation and that it could go south or sideways easily. But I still think that, I think that we're both in agreement then that the default position of the Taliban is to just let us evacuate. Let's see. Anything? Just what did anybody expect? Some folks can't see what is staring them in the face. A good question. So anyway, I think that's where we'll wrap it up. Solid 45 minutes. If you're new here, this is episode 5 of the Will Chamberlain podcast, Will Chamberlain Show. We're about to get this stuff live on your podcast so you can download them anytime. As you can see, this is kind of the basic structure of how I do them, where I go through the news for the first, half hour, 40 minutes, and then go through comments. This was more focused on comments because I really feel like there's one story today. I didn't really want to talk about anything else in Afghanistan. Normally, this program will talk about a variety of stories that are in the news. Today was just not that day. But if you're still here and you're listening and you're enjoying it, this is a great time to hit that subscribe button. Subscribe, youtube.com/human events. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you get notified when I go live consistently Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern. Also hit like on facebook.com/human events media. And when we're ready to get this going, we will let you know. Okay. Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoyed it.